So in this tutorial, we're going to go over fire and smoke simulation. And this is pretty easy to start in Blender, so we're going to go over that. First thing that we're going to do is go to our physics properties and click on fluid. And in here, we have few options for our object. It can be flow, effector, or domain. Domain is basically the area where you want the simulation to run. Flow is basically an object that generates the actual smoke or the actual fire, and then effector is basically an object that can interact with it. So maybe you want something to block it or something like that. You would use effector there. So we can click domain in here, and let's scale this up a bit. So we have this object that can actually do something. And if we try to click space, nothing happens because we don't have the flow. So let's click Shift A, create another cube, and let's create it a bit smaller, maybe increase the size of this cube. And with this cube, let's click on fluid again, and let's click flow. And now if I click space, we can see that we have some simple smoke going up. Now you'll notice one thing, and that is that the smoke is just generated once, and then it is kind of going from this cube. We can also maybe decrease the size here and then try to simulate again, so we get this faster moving smoke because it is smaller basically. If you want to change this, we can click on the geometry and click inflow, and this basically means that each frame this cube will be generating more and more smoke instead of just generating smoke once and then that smoke goes up. So if we try to simulate this, we can see that our cube is now continuously generating smoke that is going upwards. So pretty simple, we already have smoke and it is going up. Now if we try to add a sphere, let's say that we want to block the smoke that may be standing like this, and we try to play, we can see that the smoke goes right through the object. And this is where our effector comes in. We have collision or guide, depends on what you need basically. Maybe you need something to change when the object goes through this volume, but we want collision. And if you just play it again, we can see that now our smoke goes around our cube and kind of envelops it. So this is basically what we want, but let's say that now we want fire. That is pretty easy to create. We can just click fire in here and render it, and basically we get fire, and now we get some smoke at the top. Good thing is that kind of fire and smoke one in the same thing. One is just way hotter, so it is kind of similar simulation, but you have this transition from fire that when it collides with the object, it kind of goes into smoke. That is one thing. The next thing that you could do is outflow. If you just set this to outflow, nothing will happen. And the reason for this is that this object is now set to kind of try to suck up something. So if I just duplicate it, move it up, maybe set it up like this. I'm gonna also scale it on Y axis, and then change this guy to inflow and try to simulate. Now this cube will try to kind of take the smoke, absorb it instead of stopping it or moving it or something like that. So if I move it like this, we can see how the smoke just disappears. It doesn't go around, it doesn't do anything, it just disappears because this cube is basically taking it up. It will get a bit more obvious with liquids, but if we had liquid in there, this would kind of be like if we wanted some object to kind of just take out the liquid that comes, it will just absorb it, destroy it, stuff like that. So this is kind of the basics that we have in here. Now let's go into more settings, what we can actually change in here. One thing that we can change is if we click on the domain, we could change this to liquid if you want, but we, for right now, we don't want to do that. So first thing is resolution. If we increase the resolution, we can see that this looks way more detailed, but of course our frame rate dropped significantly. So this may be like, maybe like what, 5 FPS now? Let's try to play it again. Yeah, it goes to like 6 FPS, really slow, but it gives us way more detail. And this goes dramatically down if you start increasing it, so 128. If I try to play it now, it's gonna go to maybe 1 FPS or something like that. So it basically becomes 4 times less each time you double the resolution division. But we can see we get really detailed smoke and fire simulation in here. So for your final renders, you probably want something between 128 and maybe 512. And of course, the more you add, the more you will wait each frame for it to render. But we can see now how much detail we just gained going from 32 to 128. And this is also nice. In here at the bottom, you can actually see the size of the volume. The size of the volume is basically how it's generated. Each volume has velocity and some information about the smoke, and then that is used to actually generate the smoke. So this is the scale. If I go to like 16, each cell is really big, so the quality is gonna be really bad. So we can actually see the size of the cube, how it's projected. So this is just one volume for the fire, then we have another one here, and then the third one in here. We can basically see it if we increase this low enough. But 32 is pretty nice to just quickly visualize it, basically real time, and we can quickly visualize how our smoke and fire look like. There is also time scale, so we can do, let's say, double, which will just make the fire simulate way faster. And then we have this CFL number, which basically changes the simulation steps. This is kind of the accuracy, but we don't have to deal with that at this moment. We have also adaptive domain, so we can enable this if we want this to kind of change while we're working. This kind of gives you a bit more performance. So if we go back to 128, we can see how it started a bit faster. FPS was maybe 5, 6, and it will start going down again. But we gained a bit of FPS because we were using way smaller domains, so it did not have to calculate cells that are in here that are never used. Or not never used, but not used in the first maybe 50 frames or 20 frames. We can also decrease the time scale here. So that's adaptive resolution. Then you have some settings for the gas. We can add maybe noise if you want. So it is more chaotic. We can see it in here. Maybe we can even use 64 for these just to see exactly what's happening. So we can see way more noise, way more turbulence with our smoke. So it's not that linear. So if we disable this, we can see how unrealistically linear this is. That's not really how smoke works. So you can just, with one click, just make it way more realistic. And of course, your flow object, which is cube for us right now, will also determine how the shape of your smoke. So the cube is pretty unrealistic, unless say like a box is burning uniformly or something. We also have this solve. We can do that. This is all the effects that you can just easily enable or disable whenever you want, basically. And we can see now how smoke dissolves way faster, basically. So we can do like 1. And this basically disappears almost instantly. So maybe 3 if you want a small fire. And we can see how we now have really small fire with little to no smoke. So this is something that you can easily change. I would suggest maybe 32 steps for this, and we can see how it needs a bit of time to actually visualize. But these are things that we can change. So we can also change some settings for the fire. And then we have this cache, and this is basically up until when do you want the simulation to run. Usually you just set it from, you don't want to set it from the beginning if it's not necessary. So if you have a fire in here, but maybe at frame 300 you want to your camera will actually pan to this part of the image, you might want to start the fire at like frame 150 or frame 200, so it has a bit of time to start, and then when you pan it's already going, but you did not spend 150 or 200 first frames rendering fire. that is never going to be used in the video. So it all depends on what you need and how you want to work. And also you have some options when you select your inflow object. In here you of course have your fire tap, smoke, fire, and some velocities. So maybe for some reason you want initial X to be pulling towards the right, so maybe an explosion, or there is a wind or something, it can push it to one side or the other, or that will be kind of the start of your flame. You can also use textures. This is kind of to how would I say this, to kind of shape the smoke and the fire, and this can be useful at some points, but unless you're doing something cartoony or stylized, textures probably won't be necessary. Like these settings in the beginning is basically everything you'll need to start working with decently realistic fire in Blender. And of course, the more steps you add, and also sampling sub-steps, stuff like this, will add more quality, but of course we lose performance really quickly. So I would increase these settings only on the final render, when you have everything set up and you generally know how things work with your flames. And then at the last render you can increase all of this, bake it, and then you can have a really good fire and smoke quality basically at the end, and not lose any performance while you are prototyping and working.